We're finding all the differences between bread in the US and the UK.
Bread? Have you completely run out of ideas? Yeah, perhaps, but...
Processed bread has existed in both countries for almost a century, and on the surface, it looks quite similar. Unless you've been to the other country's bread aisle and thought, huh? The standard bread loaf size in the UK is 800 grams. Here's the Hovis version. This one is medium thickness, which equates to 20 slices of bread. You might also see mini loaves or half loaves. Here is the Hovis one again, it's 400 grams.
Here's a US processed white bread loaf, also 20 slices, 570 grams. So that means the UK option is this much denser, heavier than the UK loaf. Bigger in the UK, eh? Wonder Bread also comes in a giant, size. The giant size, which is 28 slices, and according to the package is 680 grams.
Let's check the dimensions of a regular slice.
I'm gonna go for a middle piece. The bread is 4.5. I'm going for like the highest part. Can we say that's 4 inches?
And it weighs?
29 grams.
38 grams.
So if my calculations are correct, it would take roughly this many slices of the US Wonder Bread to match 20 slices of the UK Hovis bread. Let's put this density to the test. We're gonna see which country's bread is more pillowy or pillowier. Pillow-like.
Here is our entire loaf of Hovis. Our loaf is 24 centimeters tall.
We're getting scientific now, folks. Here's a stack of our loaf, and right now it is exactly a foot?
Combined, these two weigh 1.5 kilograms. We're gonna squish this bread. So with a weight of 1.5 kilos on top of it, it's actually only gone down to 20 centimeters. What if we stop messing around? Here is a 3 kilogram weight.
I'm gonna use this external hard drive I haven't opened yet to really match his weight.
Just another day at the office. And obviously now, for science,
What's the squishiest I can get this?
giving CPR to a loaf of bread. Using all the power of my enormous muscles, I was able to get this down to just 8 centimeters, a third of its original height.
We win, I think. So alert the scientific community. The most accurate test of bread fluffiness has been done by us. Food Wars team, you're welcome.
Shelf life and texture are two of the key reasons why our bread evolved to look like this instead of this.
Modern bread was designed to be tough enough to hold lunch meats and cheeses, withstand the spread of peanut butter, and be soft enough to bite through, and stay edible longer. To do this, bread needs sugar, fat, and preservatives.
Fat, usually in the form of butter or oil, can be added to make it softer and to extend the shelf life. Some sugars occur naturally in bread, but others can be added in to improve the texture, to inhibit mold, and to retain moisture.
How much of that is in our processed bread, you ask? Our standard white bread, Wonder Bread. 2 slices contain 5 grams of added sugar and 1.5 grams of fat. Look at this loaf of bread, it appears to be healthier. Here's the Oro wheat, am I pronouncing that right? I don't know. Whole grains, healthy, multigrain. I want to point out here, it even says heart healthy, fantastic. 2 slices of this has 6 grams of added sugar and 5 grams of fat. I know. There's more to bread than just fat and sugar. There's more ways of deciding if it's good for you or not. I'm just saying, as far as sugar and fat, this guy has more. Moving on to my man, Dave and his killer bread. Shout out to Dave, killer guitar bro. For sliced bread, this is more of a premium option, I feel, right? Dave's killer bread, specifically this good seed, 2 slices of bread have 10 grams of added sugar and 5 grams of fat. Dave, why so much sugar, my man?
For the most part, UK bread sugar content is pretty low, although the labels here don't often specify if the sugars are added or naturally occurring. Here are a few processed bread options with a range of sugar content. 2 slices of our Hovis white bread contains 2.8 grams of sugar. One of our more sugary options is actually this protein power bread from Warburton's. 2 slices of this contains 3.2 grams of sugar. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, we have this wholemeal, no added sugar bread from Warburton's. 2 slices of this contains just 0.86 grams of sugar.
What about the calorie count? Back to Wonder Bread, 2 slices, 140 calories.
2 slices of our Hovis soft white medium bread contains 186 calories. Compared to the US Wonder Bread, our bread has less fat, but more calories and carbs. Surprisingly, much higher sodium too.
Although it's a small amount, the US bread is higher in fiber. Fiber aids in digestion and helps you feel fuller longer. You'll also notice both breads are fortified with vitamins and minerals. White flour loses most of its essential nutrients during the milling process. In the 1930s, once processed bread became a staple of the modern diet, scientists saw a rise in health issues like rickets and iron deficiencies due to lack of nutrients. So, with the help of the government, manufacturers added those nutrients back in. In the US, this was a major selling point for Wonder Bread. Ads in the 60s and 70s boasted Wonder Bread helps build strong bodies in 12 ways. And let me take a look at this real quick. I mean, look at this. It's got vitamin D, calcium, iron, potassium, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid. Booyah.
In November 2024, the UK government introduced new legislation requiring flour producers to fortify their flour with folic acid. This was mainly designed with pregnant people in mind as it helps prevent birth defects. There are also preservatives added to the bread to help extend the shelf life and to give it a softer, chewier texture. Here are some commonly used ones in both the US and the UK.
A few of them have scary sounding names, but are in some cases natural and harmless in the amount that they are in the bread. Like calcium propionate is a naturally occurring organic salt. Acetic acid is an organic acid and the main component of vinegar. Ascorbic acid is vitamin C. Why do they not just call it vitamin C? I don't know. All these ingredients have been studied extensively and are recognized as safe in both countries.
When it comes to retail, bread is sorted into categories in both the US and the UK. There are some key differences between the common types you'll see advertised. In the UK, we pretty much just have a big two. We have white bread and wholemeal bread.
Here in the US, we have something I like to consider the big four: white, whole wheat, whole grain, multigrain. But are there actually many differences between these?
Let's start with white bread. White bread is made using only the endosperm of a wheat grain. That's what gives it its distinctive white color. Removing the germ and the bran also takes away some nutrients and gives it a higher glycemic index. I do love white bread. I'm a sucker for it. I know it's not nutritionally as complete as some of the others, but I was a fussy kid and I love my white bread.
In the US, our white bread flour is often bleached. Once floured is milled, it needs to be aged a little bit before it can be ideal for baking. But that takes time and money, so some manufacturers use chemical aging, aka bleaching, to quicken the process and make the production more reliable.
In the UK, it's actually illegal to bleach flour. Common bleaching additives such as potassium bromate and azodicarbonamide have been considered possible carcinogens after studies linked them to causing cancer in lab animals. Next up, we have wholemeal or whole grain bread. Wholemeal is just the more common term in the UK. This bread, as the name suggests, uses the entire kernel in the milling process. That means the bran, the germ, and the endosperm are all in here. Wholemeal doesn't refer to a specific type of grain. This could be wheat, but it could also be other things like oat or barley. Definitely got a bit more sponginess and robustness to it than the white loaf did. Much more rounded flavor as well.
The bran is the grain's outer protective shell. The endosperm is the starchiest part of the grain, and it nourishes the germ as it develops. And the germ is what sprouts into the plant. It's the only part of the grain that has healthy fats. This means these grains are a great source of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. All other bread types have grain that have been refined, so they give bread a finer and softer texture and increase its shelf life. Next, we got whole wheat. As the name suggests, the same process as the whole grain, but specifically they use only wheat for whole wheat rather than other grains like rye. I've always associated white bread with being sweeter, but right there it's like, it tastes kind of like nothing. Whole wheat can really taste the wheat. How's that for some insight? If I was to choose between the two, I usually go whole wheat because you can actually taste the bread. Now, whole wheat bread is technically also a whole grain bread, but not all whole grain bread is whole wheat. Understand?
UK bread is commonly made with a different type of wheat to the US. The UK mostly uses white wheat, which tends to have a lower gluten level when compared to American grains. Some UK breads actually make up for this by adding additional wheat gluten as an extra ingredient.
Our wheat is mostly a red wheat variety and yes, has higher gluten levels. It might be hard to see, but higher gluten content usually means it's chewier and springier. This feels spongier, right? So many different grains, not just wheat, hence whole grain. And there's also multigrain. Now, multigrain bread refers to any bread where it has at least two different grains. Two means multi, apparently. But usually they use a few. Multigrains can be grains like wheat, oats, rye, quinoa. These grains may have been processed, so unless it states it on the package, don't assume multigrain is also whole grain.
We do have multigrain loaves in UK stores, but they're not super common. Not many of the major brands produce them, or at least advertise that they do have them, although we did find that this Warburton's Protein Power Loaf is technically multigrain. Brits also love seeded bread, which, as the name suggests, is bread either topped with seeds or with seeds mixed in. Both this Protein Power Loaf and this explicitly seeded loaf from Warburton's obviously have seeds, although it's important to note that seeds are not the same thing as grains and do not count for the purpose of something being multigrain. Who knew bread could be so complicated?
Given the extra emphasis placed on these terms used in the US, it's likely that this is somewhat of a marketing ploy. The key things to watch out are they using the whole grain? And what percentage of the total flour used is whole grain? Here's the bad news. Some of these loaves make it hard to figure that second one out.
In the UK, for something to be advertised as wholemeal bread, it must be made with 100% wholemeal flour. In the US, however, bread only has to be made with 50% wholemeal flour to be able to be sold as wholemeal bread. We do have something called 50-50 or best of both bread here in the UK. That means that it's a 50-50 blend of white and wholemeal flour. Importantly, in the UK, they do not and cannot advertise this as wholemeal bread, but in the US, they would be able to.
That actually sounds similar to something like this Sara Lee loaf, which describes itself as white bread with whole grain. It definitely tastes closer to white than whole grain. 8 grams of whole grain, no high fructose corn syrup, no artificial colors and flavors. Let's go!
When it comes to shelf life, most Brits will look at the tag on the label for guidance. According to the guidance on most retail websites, sliced white bread is good for around 3 days.
In the US, ours is printed on the package right here. Something to note, in both countries, the manufacturer sets these dates. In the US, we have the shelf life, which means how long a product is good for, and the expiration date, and that's the last day the manufacturer guarantees quality and safety. Now, sometimes it's fine after that date, and sometimes it's not. Lastly, there's the sell-by date, which tells the stores who manage the inventory when they gotta get rid of it by. You can definitely eat it a few days after that if you handle the product properly.
Here in the UK, we have 2 things. We have a best before date, which is regarding quality. After that date, it might still be safe to eat, but it's not going to be at its best. And then secondly, we have a use by date. This is the date where if it's gone past that, it's probably no longer safe to consume. That said, I have definitely eaten bread when it's past its best by and probably use by dates. I've even picked off little moldy bits, I'm sorry.
I rarely encounter moldy bread. Perhaps it's because it is common to keep processed bread in the refrigerator, although not the case in the UK.
Absolutely not. If you ask famed UK baker Paul Hollywood, he claims that bread goes stale 3 times faster in the fridge. That's because the refrigeration actually draws moisture out of the bread. Typically in the UK, I would say bread is stored in a cupboard, kitchen counter, or maybe in a bread bin.
Okay, fine. But I do want to point out, according to the USDA, commercially baked breads can be stored 7 to 14 days in the refrigerator.
Another crucial aspect when it comes to storing bread, how do you reseal the bag?
I tell you, the only way to do it, like, if a bread comes with this guy, this is what I use.
I'm definitely a twist and tuck. Simply grab your bag,
I'm definitely a twist.
spin it around, tuck it under there.
There it is, sealed. This is the way to do it. This is the easiest way to do it. This works even with one piece missing, still can tuck it, stays as fresh. Sometimes you'll get these clips. I don't know, do you know what these are called? Does anyone know what these are called? I have no idea what they're called. When I was in high school, these kind of got banned in my school, or at least a classroom I was in, because everyone knows you just break off a thing. You know this trick? Does anyone know what I'm doing? Okay. Then you put in your finger like that, and then phew. I used to be a lot more nimble, but you could really like, phew, like just like get it, like they're like flick them at each other, and people are getting them like in the face and the neck, and they're breaking skin. So, school to step in and be like, you can't bring these anymore.
The American-style bread clips are not common in the UK. Typically, it's just like a piece of tape, but I did find one on this bread.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think Joe would probably take one of my eyes out with one before I could land a hit on him, but hey, good fun. Here are some of the most popular bread options in the UK.
And here are a bunch of the most common processed breads in the US.
Right away, you can see a difference in the packaging used in both countries. The 3 main bread brands here in the UK are Hovis, Warburton's, and Kingsmill. Although additionally, every supermarket in the UK will stock its own brand of bread. The big brands over here have warm and pleasant names. They sound like maybe the surname of the founder of the brand, or a town somewhere in England.
Whereas we have names like Wonder Bread, or Nature's Own. It's from nature, guys. Don't forget about Nature's Harvest. And we also have my man Dave's Killer Bread. Got this, you see this dude, Dave, I assume, playing the guitar.
One thing I will say about the marketing over here is that the UK bread companies take their TV ads very seriously. Hovis won ITV's Advert of the Decade award in 2009 for their Go On Lad campaign. And Warburton seemingly has a limitless TV ad budget. They've run campaigns with Sylvester Stallone, Samuel L. Jackson, Robert De Niro, and more.
I totally fall for the fact that a bread has a lot of like seeds, or you could see like the grains, and it's like a darker brown. I'm absolutely like, ah yes, the healthier bread. I don't look at the label, I don't look at the fiber or anything content.
I really don't have much brand loyalty when it comes to bread, and I'm not sure many Brits do either. My personal view is that unless you're spending big money on like an artisanal loaf, I feel like the supermarket own brand ones just do the job completely fine. We do eat a lot of bread in the UK. 99% of households regularly buy bread, and an estimated 12 million loaves are sold every day. In 2024, the UK bread market was estimated to be worth £7.8 billion. All of the major three players produce a white loaf and a wholemeal loaf as the bare minimum.
The US bread industry was valued at $30 billion in 2022. Grupo Bimbo is the biggest with a $15 billion market cap, owning over 40 brands. Wasn't gonna get all of them, couldn't have got all of them. So these are four. Starting here, we got Sara Lee. We all know Sarah. Nature's Harvest, Artesano, and I'm assuming this is pronounced Ora wheat, but they took out the H. I don't know why. What can be said about this bread? We already saw the Sara Lee, we saw Nature's Harvest. Guys, this one, how clever is this? They made it seem like the bag is steamed because they put a hot loaf of bread in here. This isn't steamed, this isn't condensation. Look, it's not, the plastic is frosted. Let me show you. This is clever. This is, I would probably like, what do we got here? Ooh, golden wheat. So let's taste this. It says golden wheat, this is just like white bread. That's fine. I think points for the steam bag. This would definitely stand out in the aisle. I hope nobody bought this thinking that like, wow, they must be bagging in the back of this Vaughn's or whatever.
From Hovis, we'll start with Best of Both. I touched upon it earlier, but Best of Both is a type of loaf that contains 50% white flour and 50% wholemeal flour. So for context, here we have a white bread slice, your Best of Both slice, and here is a wholemeal slice. I think the draw of this one is that it's kind of like a healthier option than white bread, but without fully going to the brown bread side. I also think that when Joe first heard about this, he thought it was going to be like a zebra loaf, like one brown, one white slice, which I actually kind of like the idea of. Hovis also makes a granary loaf. According to the website, the granary method was discovered by Benedictine monks in Burton Abbey. What they would do is actually malt their grains, so they would let them just about start to sprout and then toast them. So you really do get kind of like a rich malty flavor from this bread compared to just a classic wholemeal.
I probably would pick the whole grain, healthy multigrain. I mean, like I can be persuaded. It says heart healthy on here. That's important to me. I'm getting it. You know. Yes, it has more sugar, but it has 40 grams of whole grains, 9 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber. It's free from artificial preservatives, all those things earlier that we scared you with. So it's not, you're not really tipping the scales in your health, good or bad, with the bread you're picking. Like, what are you putting in the middle of it and how much are you eating it? I think has more to do with your health than whatever bread you're picking. Not a nutritionist. Don't take this clip and dunk on me on TikTok. People are like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Right. I never said I did.
Now we're on to some options from Warburton's. We went a bit crazier here, I promise there's no bias. Firstly, we have this protein power loaf. This one has 16 grams of protein in every 2 slices, which does sound quite high. For context, it's basically double the amount of a white toasty loaf. I guess if I were a gym goer, which quite obviously I'm not, maybe I would look into doing this. I just worry that with the protein stuff, often it's an excuse to charge a bit more than you normally would for a product that hasn't really changed much. In recent years, a lot of the bread makers have started doing toasty loaves. The primary use of this is actually for toasty sandwiches, usually with something like cheese and other toppings in the middle. This is extra thick bread, so it's designed to contain all those delicious toasty fillings.
Next up, Flour Foods, the second biggest producer of processed bread in the US. Also, so many big brands. Here's 4. Look, I went to Walmart. All right, this is what they had. Nature's Own. Acton, look at this. Okay, UK, look at this. I don't think got pictures of wheat on here. 13 grams of whole grain.
Here we have a baker's bloomer loaf. It's extra thick white bread with what they describe as a rustic crust. By rustic, I think they mean it's a little bit thicker compared to a crust that you would get on a regular loaf. They also give it a dusting of this flour topping as well. Personally, this is some of my favorite toast bread. Next up, we have Danish bread. Not made in Denmark, still made by Warburton's, just called Danish bread. This is advertised as like a lower calorie option when compared to regular bread. Apparently they use a Danish technique, which is to put the bread in a larger than usual loaf tin. As it bakes, it's allowed to rise higher, more air pockets are in there, so there's kind of like less density going on.
Home Pride, look at this, got the silhouette of the lady holding a steaming loaf of bread, we're assuming. It just screams from a farm or a small town. Surely the people who made this took painstaking care. It just is processed. This is softer. Couldn't tell the difference. I know there's difference, but back to what I said before, the reason I get like the bread with like nuts and stuff in it, because I'm like, all this tastes is too similar. Might as well get something at least like the possibility of getting some grains in there.
As a slightly more fancy option, we have a Old English white loaf. One that I do have a soft spot for is tiger bread. Warburtons have leaned heavily into the branding for this one, which I appreciate. We have the kind of like tiger stripe packaging down here, the claw over the label. Tiger bread gets its name from the pattern on the top. What you do is you start with a white loaf and then you paint a kind of rice paste on top of it. As it bakes and rises, the rice paste will crack and also char up a little bit. So you end up with this, almost kind of tiger pattern paint on top. It does add like a little bit of a distinctive flavor to it, but I think it's more about the look of it and also the texture. Like I said, Brits love a seeded loaf, and Warburtons are cashing in on that. Here is their original seeded batch loaf. I do like the look of a seeded loaf. It feels healthier as well, just the fact that you can see the seeds that you're eating. And then finally, one that I found today that I've never seen before is a milk roll. I don't know what this is. I know in Japan they make milk bread. I think it's called shokupan. Maybe it's kind of like that. It's just odd to see like a cylindrical bread, you know, you do not see that often. I mean, to me, that just tastes like white bread.
People want to get granular, pun intended, I guess, about the differences. But if all this tastes the same, don't you think you'd want something like, look, at least I'm getting my daily seeds. Yeah, more sugar, more fat, but like, doesn't this seem like it's just got more of the good stuff in it? This is really good. I, of course, have no proof of this. I'm wondering, because now that I know that it has a lot of added sugar, it does taste a little sweeter than the other ones. Like, I'm noticing a sweet difference. But I don't know if maybe they're adding more sugar to this to maybe offset what would essentially be a bitter taste of these like seeds and grains and stuff. I don't know.
Here we have the Kingsmill 50/50. Then we have a play on their 50/50, which is 50/50 no crusts. Obviously, it's not possible, as far as I'm aware, to bake a loaf without crusts. So they must be baking regular loaves and then just cutting all the crusts off them and putting them in bags. Also, come on, if you're not eating your crusts, please grow up. Even when I was young and a fussy eater, I ate my crusts. That's one thing I can claim some moral high ground on. We're not fans of food waste. Every crust we cut off goes on to make animal feed. The animals can eat grass. Humans should eat their crusts.
The average price of this loaf of Wonder Bread from my local Walmart was $2.92 for 20 slices.
Here is our Hovis Soft White 800 gram loaf. At Tesco, that'll cost you £1.39. That's 40% cheaper compared to the Wonder Bread. Obviously, costs can vary depending on which store you go to.
One study showed that in the US, the price difference between a white loaf of bread at a Walmart state to state, the difference of price could vary as much as $3.
Bread is pretty cheap in the UK, especially if you're willing to avoid the branded goods. Aldi's own brand version of this loaf will cost you just 47 pence.
How expensive can we get with grocery store bread?
Here is a premium crafted white sourdough loaf from Tesco. This loaf cost me £3.75. At 800 grams, it's also the same size as the Hovis loaf.
We have so much bread in the US. So much. Here is a loaf of Ezekiel bread. This loaf was $7.99 for 20 slices. Now, it is not an ultra-processed bread, I will say that, so that probably has something to do with the increase in price. Now, out of morbid curiosity, I want to know what's the most expensive loaf of processed bread I could get here in Los Angeles. So, of course, I went on to Erewhon.com. For those of you who don't know, Erewhon is a grocery chain in Los Angeles where people get like smoothies for like 50 bucks or whatever. It's very expensive. Way more expensive than Whole Foods. Anyway, I found this, a keto sandwich bread, the Base Culture keto bread, a loaf of it for $12. Ooh.
Bread has been around forever. The ancient Egyptians were some of the first to make it, and that was millennia ago. Eventually, bread made its way up through Europe. Romans were all about bread during the Roman Empire. When European settlers went over to the US, they brought bread with them.
Once the US started mass producing wheat, bread as an industry exploded. The Industrial Revolution introduced us to mechanically milled flour so it could be created in abundance. Processes were introduced like adding chemicals to make mass bread production more reliable at a massive scale that was consistent with texture, taste, and shelf life. Otto Rohwedder came along in the early 1900s with his industrial bread slicer, and everyone lost their minds.
Bread was cheap, widely available, and lasted a long time. In many ways, it was actually paramount in starting modern supermarket culture. Eventually, many more styles of bread were introduced to the mass market, leading us to today, when many grocery stores have entire aisles dedicated just to bread. I'm a bread boy, I'm not afraid to admit that. I buy quite a lot of bread. It does vary. If I'm feeling like a treat, or I know I've got like a weekend coming up where I'm gonna have time to make brunch, then I'll grab myself a nice loaf of sourdough or some kind of bloomer from the shop.
Which bread do I normally have in my house? You guys are not going to believe this. But because of my diet, as you've seen from these two shows that I host, my wife does most of the grocery ordering Every time I go to the grocery store, I come back with chips and goldfish crackers and energy drinks. So she's just like, she takes care of it and does the Instacart order. And the bread that she introduced me to, that we have in our house almost exclusively, is this Ezekiel bread. If I was to pick though, sometimes I'll get Dave's Killer Bread. I feel like with Dave's Killer Bread, I'm like supporting like the little guy. I just realized in this video today that it was bought by a giant corporation, so I guess not. Hey Dave, the American dream, right? You made a company, you sold it. I'm assuming you play guitar now. Good for you.
I'm not much of a baker. I really wish I could be. I know everyone started making sourdough in lockdown. I wasn't one of those people, unfortunately. I'm a good cook, but baking for me is a very different skill set. It's more of a science, and I like kind of freestyling a bit in the kitchen, which I think with bread you can't get away with.